Blitzball Season 2, the game of gladiatorial sports mayhem. It's a fantasy situation with fantasy dwarfs and fantasy humans, or just humans, fighting in a sport that has a lot to do with beating each other up, but also seems to be inspired by football to some extent. This is Season 2, so it is the second set in the system, but I did not play the first set, so I won't be able to compare. Also, I don't know the first thing about football, so you're gonna get the most unbiased opinion about this game that one can possibly have. It's a two-player game, although I guess you could play it in teams, meaning with multiple players controlling the same team of players. So this is the board representing the field of the competition. It is double-sided. You have a different configuration on the other side. This should be there. Up there, very important, we have challenge cards. They will describe different situations, such as steal the ball from the opponent or knock down an opponent. And if you complete the situation described in the challenge card, then you acquire the card. You score a number of points, and also when you flip the card to the other side, it has an advantage that you can spend whenever the description of the advantage tells you that you can trigger that bonus. And pretty much those cards are the heart of the game because they allow you to score points, but they also are the countdown for the game. They're removed from that area when you complete the achievement, when you acquire whatever it is, when you meet the circumstances described in the card, but also at the end of a turn, if you haven't completed one, then it is removed. So in any case, that deck will be thinned out whether you complete those challenges or not. You play through that deck, and at the point of play with the most points wins the game. Again, you score points by completing those challenges, also by scoring a touchdown, which is when you are in the starting line of the opponent with the ball and you are unmarked. In game terms, unmarked means that there are no enemy models adjacent to you. I do that. Booyah, that is 3 points, and then the ball drops here. And if, by the way, if anybody's standing on that spot at that point, they get injured and they are temporarily kicked out of the game, that's a very heavy ball. The game comes with many variant rules. You can think of them as mini expansions, different things that you can do. So I'm just going to cover the basic idea, the basic game here. Each player has a team of fantasy creatures, again, fantasy dwarves or fantasy humans. It just sounds strange, but it's the way it is. They're not normal humans, they're fantasy humans. And they're represented by these plastic miniatures, pretty detailed. You will probably want to paint yours. I'm not, because I'm not good at painting and I'm not interested in learning. I can tell you, though, that they're very easy to build. Even somebody who's completely incompetent, such as myself, can build these miniatures, and they do not require glue. Although for some of the dwarfs, some of the joints were a little loose, and I did use a little bit of glue. After you paint them, probably you'll also be able to tell them apart a little bit better. And that's one problem that I have with this game. It's not a huge one, but some of the models are very, very close to one another. Some of the dwarves, the lineman and the runner, the only difference is that the runner has a ball. And depending on the orientation of the miniatures, you just can't tell where's the ball. And so, here's the runner. And these are the linemen. This is one of the linemen. So they're just something that happens with miniature games from time to time when you don't paint them, but at least that's just my problem, not yours, possibly, probably. You have your miniatures. Each miniature also is linked to a card that tells us the ability of those miniatures. And some of the poses are really helpful here. So the thrower really tells me which one is which. Not so much the blitzer, that again, the blitzer and the lineman look pretty similar, if not for the pointy helmet that the blitzer has. In any case, each miniature is linked to a card that tells you the name, of course, but also tells you the move up, to how many spaces the miniature moves when you take a run action. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the humans are faster than the dwarfs. Then you have the throw value and the armor value. The throw, you take a throw check when you're trying to throw a ball. You roll a 6-sided die, and you succeed if you roll the number of higher after taking modifiers into account. Armor, when somebody knocks you on the ground, you take an armor check, so you roll a die, and you avoid an injury if you score that number or higher. If you roll your armor value or higher. If you fail an armor check, then you're sent here to the football prison. I think it's also called the dugout or something like that. And you will need then to spend an action to go back to your starting line. Another important concept is that of marked, and you probably, if you know sport, you probably know how that works. If you are adjacent to another miniature and all 8 adjacent squares count as adjacent for game purposes, then you're marked. In this case, these 2 characters are marking each other. That is important because that changes what your character can do. Players alternate taking turns, and during a turn, you can take 3 actions. You can even take multiple actions with the same character, but you cannot take the same action more than once with the same character. So a character could run, throw, and mark, could block, sidestep, and run, all possible combinations, but you cannot run, or mark, or run, or block, run, sidestep. You could do that. Yeah, I think you get my drift. What you can do depends on the situation of your character. Again, if you are unmarked, you're open, then you can run. If you run and you enter a space with the ball, then you can pick it up and you place it there in your bases. The color of the ball doesn't matter. And so that's for running. Running, you can move up to the full move indicated on your card, but only if you start not adjacent to an opponent and if you never make contact to an opponent. If you do want to make contact with an opponent, you need to mark, which is that. Meaning you can move up to 2 spaces, but you are then allowed to make contact with an opponent. So basically, if I'm here and I want to make contact with that character, it's going to cost me 2 actions. 1 to run, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then another action to mark, because I'm really studying here the tactical situation. If you are unmarked, you can also throw the ball. Suppose that character wants to throw the ball to that character. Then you use this template here to check the distance, to check basically if it's a short or a long throw. Also, if you have a line of sight that doesn't go through obstacles, and that would be a short throw. When you throw, you take a throw test, which is you roll your 6-sided die and you're trying to roll the number or higher with modifiers such as -1 if you are throwing the long range, -1 if the target is marked, and or if your line of sight is obstructed by the opponent's figures. So when all is said and done, if you throw successfully, they will receive the ball. Hooray! Otherwise, the ball bounces. In this case, to determine where it goes, you roll an 8-sided die. You look at this template here, and that tells you, suppose that the ball bounces off this guy's head, and we rolled a 3, then using this one as the center of the template, 3 means that the ball bounces here. And in a lot of other situations, basically, if you cannot catch the ball will bounce and bounce around sometimes quite a bit until it's in a position where you can run and pick it up. So much for running, throwing, and marking. If you are next to an opponent, then marked figures can choose to sidestep, which is movement away from an opponent, but it only has a distance of 1. So again, very expensive in terms of opportunity cost, in terms of actions you're spending. Or you can also try to block them, which is a delicate euphemism for beating the whatever out of them. When you perform the block action, you roll a die, and there are all of these symbols. And here we have a player rate that tells us the nomenclature of what they do, and some are pretty self-explanatory. So shove means you shove it like that. You shove your opponent like that. Others are a little more elaborate, and you need to really have the rule book at the beginning to make sense of what they do exactly. Knocking somebody down means that they go down for sure. Now they're prone, so you can run past them. They don't count as something that has the mark sidestep limitation. And they also have to take an armor test to see if they're just prone, they're wondering why the ground is so close to their face, or they're also injured, in which case, again, they're taken out of the game temporarily. They go in reserve. If you have a prone miniature, all that the miniature can do is to stand up, and it costs an action. If you are in the dugout, then then you're in reserve, and the character in the dugout can spend an action, or you can spend an action for them to put them in your starting line. Basically, this is the idea. It's pretty simple, really, once you get the idea. It's very intuitive, very straightforward, very thematic. Again, not that I know football very much, but I guess I can figure out the idea of throwing a ball, and if you're next to somebody who doesn't want you to catch it, it's harder to catch it. So everything is very thematic and very intuitive. You have asymmetrical gameplay because you have humans that are faster, but also more brittle, and then you have the dwarves that are friggin' mini tanks. They may be slower, but they just don't go down. You can inflict a lot of pain on them, and they don't feel it. And so you have this asymmetrical situation there. You continue to play turn after turn. It's possible to have an early victory if a side scores 10 points more than the opponent, then it's insta-death. Other than that, you play until the end of the challenge deck, because we are also going to show some of the cards in case you want to pause and read the text. You play until the end of the challenge deck, and at the point the player with the most points wins the game. Blitzball. What can I say? It's fun stuff. It's very simple. It's very intuitive. I played it only with my 8-year-old daughter Luisa because these are times of pandemic. I don't get to play with my adult friends. We are quarantining. Who knows when I'll play with adult friends again? And this game really works. Maybe other parents out there will feel less comfortable about a game that has such open fantasy violence, but there's also a little bit of a comedic element to me in it, and then my daughter just loves the idea of using those mini tanks, the dwarves, to devastate my poor humans, and so it works. I do believe actually the kids have a natural element of aggression, and if they can express it through gaming instead of on their sister, then all the best. But don't quote me on that. I don't have multiple PhDs in pedagogy. That's just a complete crazy hunch that I had as a parent. Back to the game. Yes, you can play with a kid if you don't mind your kids playing games with an element of violence. In terms of complexity, definitely is something that a kid can figure out. Maybe your kids also been exposed to sport and football more than mine, because we just are not a family that has much of an interest in that. And so I figured out, wow, look at these things. If you throw the ball when somebody's coming and trying to run you over, you throw it to somebody else who's not being surrounded by other people. Maybe that's a good idea. Probably some of you had already figured this out by watching sports, and it was like, what? Crazy. So I just developed this incredible understanding of the tactical reality of sports. I'm very impressed by myself. The game works. The game is fun. It's very simple. There is randomness due to the die rolls, and so you have your best player that can do something really special, almost never miss, and they're gonna miss a bunch of times because the dice dictate so. But at the same time, everybody rolls a lot. So there's going to be, it's the situation where in the long run, if you roll dice 100 times, things even themselves out. And maybe you're going to roll 100 times, maybe 80. It's enough to get you the sense that everybody will get some good rolls and bad rolls sooner or later. And maybe again, you roll 80 times instead of 100 because the game is fairly short. You can play it in 30, 40 minutes, just short and sweet. So it keeps the experience tense and intense. I love the fact that the field feels a bit claustrophobic, so you're never too far from somebody who may smack in the face and steal your ball. You're never too far from a place where you can do a touchdown. So it's nice and tight. Spatially, it has a nice and tight feel. Temporally is the same because it doesn't last too long, but it lasts enough that you have a chance of scoring 1 or 2 touchdowns, complete some of those objectives, and so on and so forth. I like how fast the challenges come and go, randomly of course, but oh my gosh, the window of opportunity opens now. It's gonna close because the card is gonna be discarded, but then you see that the next one that's coming out is the same one again. I like the fact that those challenges have a range of things that you can do to score those points, but not a lot. So actually, a card will give me a point if I knock down an opponent, another one if I injure an opponent, which usually requires knocking them down, and so. Well, I missed one, but I don't completely ignore that setup because the next opportunity may just emerge right away again. So it just keeps the game flowing, but at the same time you don't feel like, oh, what is the point of going after that thing because I'll never score it. Because the things that allow you to score are things that often make sense anyways. Maybe you get an extra point for a touchdown, which you were trying to score anyways. You get an extra point for knocking somebody to the ground, which maybe you wanted to do anyways because it's just fun to do so. If you ask my daughter Louisa, that would be her take probably. So those challenges make sense. You don't feel like sometimes in certain games you're just going through the motions because you just want to check cross off things from a list to score those points. There are things that will score you points and you want to do them at that time rather than another time, precisely to score those points. But at the same time, they're well integrated within the overall experience. So you have a game that looks nice because of those miniatures. I wish there was more variety in the sculpts to give me a more immediate sense of who's who. But you paint your miniatures, so you won't have that problem. So you have nice components, simple, sweet rules, and frantic, quick-moving, really intense gameplay, which with this topic is precisely what you want. So definitely fun, definitely enjoyable. So Blitzball Season 2. At some point, I guess I'll pick up Season 1 also. I assume you can mix and match the teams, so you have more replay value there. Again, I assume because I haven't played that one. But I'm definitely very pleased with Blitzball Season 2.